One of the most important features of biology is that biological systems are open systems. What this means is that they are open to influence and change based on external pressures. Right? They're not closed systems like your watch, right? Where everything operates according to like clockwork, right? Each gear serves a purpose. If one gear breaks, the whole thing breaks down. Right? An open system is one that can change inside based off of events happening outside of them. Uh, However, we're not just biological beings, we're psychological and socio-cultural ones too. And so we must be conscious of how culture and society wind up affecting the psychological as well, and how that in turn can influence the biological. Because all of these things are open systems. What this gives us is functionally a sort of two-tiered account. The most basic shape of the of hermeneutics, right, which is what evolutionary biology functionally is a hermeneutic system, an adjusting system. Um, is the circle, right, where you have the part here, the whole down here. Part influences the whole influences its parts, right? Operates on its parts. Right? The same thing applies here. And this gives us a two-tier account of the relationship between biology and psychology, right? Uh, Psychology sort of stands as the individual in the middle of the cultural, right? And influenced by the biological. So we've got a two-part circle. We have the biological, the most basic. The external influences can influence genetic expression, right? So what we eat, what we do, that sort of thing can influence how we think, right? Uh, there's good evidence for various like early life traumas severely impacting the way that we think. Things like child rearing impact, emotion, how we develop, things like that. And this goes well into adulthood too. Right? So uh, the biological, right, can influence the psychological, but the psychological can influence the cultural, right? Individuals can, are the elements that make up a society. You have enough individuals group up with similar ideas, and they add elements. They add through social and cultural revolutions. They help adjust the flow of the society. Right? Um, and society, the socio-cultural elements influence their individual psychology. Again, the whole framework from last week's lecture of the role of tradition in influencing thought. Even in rebelling against a culture, you rebel against it in a way that's informed by that culture, right? That you grew up in. But more to the point, the psychological and the socio-cultural can also influence the biological too. Right? It's all levels can influence other levels through time. Right? And this is a particularly important aspect uh, for for evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, because it shows one very important thing, that the famous idea that survival of the fittest is not a tautology. It's not as though, oh, I'm already fit to survive, therefore I survive. Right? We don't survive simply because we're already the most fit species. Species wind up surviving because they adapt to the environment. And we constantly become more and more fit to our environment. If you can't adapt, you struggle. Not necessarily die off, but you certainly struggle. So this brings us to two very, very central ideas that are at the center of biology. It's evolutionary biology. You have adaptations and acceptations. So adaptations are pretty straightforward. You already know, most likely, that what an adaptation is, but for the sake of it, let's give a formal definition. Adaptations are adjustments of phenotype or genotypical expression to fit the environment or in response to external pressures. Meanwhile, exaptations are probably exaptation is probably a more unfamiliar term. But exaptations are functionally adaptations that have grown beyond their initial purpose or been co-opted for other purposes. Think of the first aquatic species to develop legs, for example. They developed legs for better maneuverability, right? Or maybe more power, right? Then, a portion of that species developed lungs, the ability to breathe air rather than water, just filter water. And now legs serve a new purpose. It's not just for moving around in the water with greater flexibility than straightforward up and down. It now allows them to move on land. That's not the initial purpose of the legs. In this view, right? The initial purpose was greater maneuverability in the water. It's with the adaptation of lungs for breathing air that the legs now have grown beyond that initial purpose, because now you have a species that can breathe air and water. At least we'll presume that it can continue to breathe water. So the legs allow it to not only maneuver in water, but traverse on land too. And this is an example of an exaptation, right? The adaptation has grown beyond its initial purpose, right? It's more than what it was initially designed for, or not designed, but it's more than what its initial purpose is now. Usually as a result of other adaptations that allow it to be so. But sometimes it's just a matter of it grows exponentially beyond its initial purpose.